And welcome to the stage from Dow Jones, Simon Clark.
Fantastic. Thank you so much and good morning. I'm Simon Clark. I head up infrastructure and operations for Dow Jones. I do have no backing band today, unlike Andy, so it didn't happen. But before we get started today, I'm going to take you through our cloud journey and how we've partnered with BMC and AWS to get to where we are today. But what I'd like to do before I start my presentation is do a quick sense of my audience. So I probably know the answer to this, but how many of you actually are using AWS today? Put your hands up. Okay, you're in the right conference. That's a good start. Secondly, how many of you are actually using BMC today, BMC tools? Okay, so I'm going to tell you about how we've been using BMC in our cloud journey. So I'm going to take you through, we've got a lot of ground to cover in 20 minutes, and if there's time left over at the end of the presentation, I'll be available for questions. But today I'm going to talk to you about Dow Jones, who Dow Jones is. We're going to talk about our service management transformation and how we use BMC to power that. But then we're going to talk about how we utilize AWS services within Dow Jones, how we actually got to the cloud and our cloud journey, how we're actually using, how we're actually supporting cloud from an operations perspective today, and what's next in our cloud journey. So a lot of stuff to cover in the next 20 minutes. So who is Dow Jones? So Dow Jones is actually part of News Corporation. It's a global organization with 6,000 employees in over 60 locations. And over the last 100 years or so, Dow Jones has really evolved into becoming a data, news, and analytics business, providing products and services that power the business world. And our business model is broken into two aspects. On the consumer side, we have products like the Wall Street Journal and the 3 million subscribers who read that publication, to MarketWatch, to Mansion Global, through to Barron's. And then on our business-facing side, we have publications like and products like Factiva, News Plus, Newswires, and DNA, which is our new API-based solution exposing 1.2 billion news articles to our customers on that product. So let's talk about our service management transformation powered by BMC. So when I joined Dow Jones back in March of 2015, it's a very fragmented environment. We're basically using Jira for incident management and problem. We're using Remedy for change. We had a CMDB, we had discovery, we had an aging monitor of monitors with the EMC Smart solution, and we're using Control M for batch management. We started our transformation in June by basically of 2015, working from a process perspective first, and then configuring the Remedy on-demand SaaS solution to become our service management platform going forwards. And now we have a single tenant a single instance multi-tenant model that we can now use consistently. We've now expanded upon that initial tenant to actually now use the new Smart IT workplace. Digital workplace is how we actually expose our Remedy and the services for technology to our employees to actually enable self-service. And we've spent a lot of time really working on how we actually enhance our CMDB with discovery projects, including storage. And we're now starting to use Control, actually TrueSight, as our monitor of monitors to actually monitor our operations on a daily basis. So where we're planning to get to very soon is actually getting cloud assets into the CMDB. And we've been working very closely with AWS ProServe to do that, to actually import EC2, RDS, ELB, containers, and also S3 into the CMDB. We're also working on how we can actually get cloud alerts into our operations pipeline. And we've got some other great work going on right now with AWS of how to actually integrate into the BMC platform. So as you can see, by the end of this, we'll be flying very soon rather than walking back as we were. So let's talk about how we actually utilize AWS from a Dow Jones perspective. So you can see here on the left-hand side of the presentation, we've actually got an extract from Cloud Health, and this is how we monitor our cloud consumption on a daily basis. And we're using basically almost 140 services that Amazon offer in our production environments. And over 33% of our applications are now actually hosted in AWS in 14 different regions. And we have now over 184 accounts and growing. And that number is probably now closer to 200. From a size of actually a server count, we have 8,000 EC2 servers, of which 5,500 are actually production utilized. And then we actually have 3 petabytes of data actually stored up in AWS right now. So you can see AWS is without doubt our biggest data center for Dow Jones. So let's talk about our cloud journey and how we got here. So this really started back in 2014, and it was actually a direction from News Corporation at an enterprise level to make order companies get 75% of their server compute to the cloud in 3 years. Now, the business drivers for Dow Jones were very straightforward. We had some aging hardware, so instead of actually, which are causing operational issues, so instead of actually investing in capital-intensive server upgrades, one of the opportunities was then actually to migrate to the cloud. The other issues were actually we had multiple data centers, and what we've done over the period of time is actually consolidate down those data centers and make significant cost savings. And also one of the biggest things and benefits of the cloud is actually business agility. And this is most prevalent on our Wall Street Journal websites, how we actually move from on-premise hosting and change the whole delivery model to become more digital. So we have totally scalable front end to our consumers who consume Wall Street Journal, because that business news is very spiky. It comes and goes with big news stories. So how have we managed to migrate over 70% of our server compute to the cloud? What we actually adopted was a define, refine, and execute cloud approach. And we actually utilized, our best source of knowledge of what we had actually on-premise was our configuration management database, our CMDB, which is provided by BMC. And actually here is actually an extract of that CMDB dump here on the side, and this is what we actually used. So what we did is we actually used the content from the CMDB to actually help drive our cloud migration selection criteria. We started looking at our end-of-life operating systems, our end-of-life hardware. We started looking at the kind of performance we'd need in the cloud in terms of server sizing. We started looking at scalability and reliability. So did that solution have to be, did it need disaster recovery capability? Did it have to be in multiple regions rather than in the same availability zone going forwards? And that's how we really utilized the power of the CMDB to actually help define what our cloud migration strategy would be. We've actually, believe it or not, we've gone through 2 iterations of how we got to the cloud. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the issues we had when we first did what I call the rush to the cloud, which was predominantly a kind of lift and shift into EC2. From a people perspective, we absolutely had the right executive sponsorship from News Corporation down. We had an engaged partner. We actually augmented our team with an Amazon partner called Virtusa, who actually helped us on our cloud journey and actually helped with the cloud execution. And the application engineering teams were very engaged to actually move their compute workloads into the cloud. From a server and from a process perspective, we had an operations model defined. We started looking at how we're going to start provisioning cloud. And what we did from a cost and billing perspective is, because we're doing predominantly lift and shift in our first iteration, we bought a lot of reserved instances for EC2, which really helped us forecast our spend on Amazon going forward. And from a technical account perspective, we actually created 4 accounts. This is one of the kind of major things we focused on in terms of that account structure, because when we started looking at the security, it was a shared account, which was utilized by multiple applications. So when you started looking at the IAM roles you provision for the users, you know, as Spider-Man said, with great power comes great responsibility. These developers had the ability to actually create an incident, a massive blast radius having shared accounts. So 4 accounts was probably not enough. We also started looking at connectivity issues, and initially we were using VPN to connect from our data centers into Amazon, and then the direct connects became available, and then we started utilizing those to actually perform better integration. And the whole migration program was actually driven by a Cloud Center of Excellence migration program, which had a roadmap, and we had a resource model backed into that. So really, that defined, in many ways, what we call our legacy cloud environment, if such a term exists. So iteration 2 is what we call the second generation of cloud, the strategic aspect of cloud. And what we've really done from a people perspective now is we've actually hired in the cloud expertise. You know, cloud is a core competency that you need in your technology organization. We've defined a very clearly stated cloud operating model with clearly defined RACI between groups. We've created a cloud engineering team and a cloud operations team to actually run these organizations and interface into our application engineering teams. We've done a lot of work to actually transition away from our existing vendor, and we've also upskilled our technology organization by making them more cloud capable and cloud competent by using training providers like A Cloud Guru and also the AWS certification programs to actually upskill our internal organization. one of the biggest things we looked at in the second coming of cloud was actually cloud process re-engineering. And one of the biggest lessons we actually learned was actually about tagging. And if I have to emphasize one thing for this presentation, is to get a tagging strategy in place. And this tagging strategy is so important, especially application tagging, because you can then use that in your policy enforcement. So we actually have a policy enforcement engine that if our instances aren't correctly tagged, you can't actually spin those up. We'll shut them down, which is great from a security perspective. It also is really useful from a cost perspective as well. So in our pre-production environment, we actually had instances that weren't actually tagged, and we actually set a task to all our application engineering teams to actually tag all their pre-production instances. And those which weren't tagged, we actually then run the policy enforcement engine, which actually then took down all the unused cloud. And we actually saved $1,000 a day by doing that. Now, that doesn't sound a lot, but you multiply that across 365 days a year, you're now starting to talk pretty big numbers, and that's in the pre-production environment. So what we've now been looking at, really from a technology perspective, is our account strategy. And obviously, 4 was not enough, and now we got to 184, moving towards 400. But how have we grown so quickly? And you've heard today Andy talk about control tower. Well, we actually started using the concept of landing zones to actually enable this. So we actually have a standard and repeatable way of providing compute to our application engineering teams from an account and VPC perspective. And we utilize Jenkins and Terraform to actually deliver that, and it actually provides the guardrails that are required to give the engineers the capability to do what they need to do, but with those security policies defined and with our policies in place. We've also done a lot of work in terms of security tools. So we have a tool called Hammer, which we've now open sourced, which actually looks at vulnerabilities in our landscape. So, for example, we can actually find out where the S3 bucket might be exposed publicly, and Hammer will actually come in there and actually shut that down. We've also just been talking about, at reInvent this year, a new security product based upon Lambda called Redwood, which we're now deploying as part of our Golden AMI and as part of our landing zones going forwards. So as I say, the fact that we can actually automate our account provisioning now using Jenkins and using Terraform means what used to take weeks to perform, to actually provision as an account, we can actually now do in days. And this has actually enabled us to do that mass migration of creating over 180 accounts in less than 12 months. So what we've done with this, we really have what we now call our strategic cloud environment. And we now actually have an ongoing project to start migrating our original accounts into this new structure. So moving on, so what is the journey for effective cloud management? And we're really now focusing on the concept of alerting and monitoring. So to give you some perspective, we actually have about 10,000 alerts generated a month from our monitoring and alerting tools. And from that, we actually generate about 2,000 incidents a month. So you can see there's a pretty significant noise-to-signal relationship there that we need to address. So what we're now doing is we're actually creating something called the alert bus, and this is really driven by what we want to do is get the application engineering teams to actually understand what are those critical events that are occurring within our infrastructure or within our applications. How do you then start setting up what those thresholds are, and then actually then start thinking about when you use tools like CloudWatch or New Relic or Splunk, how do you start then configuring those alerts in an appropriate way that you can actually include in the schema actually an alert priority in terms of how important is this event happening. Is it a P1 that is going to happen in the next couple of minutes, or is it actually a P4 that you can actually address the following morning? And we actually then send that data through the alert bus, and it actually then works with the BMC remedy tool. And we take the data from our CMDB, utilizing the application tag to then enhance that alert coming through, so we can actually then effectively route that alert to the appropriate team, either directly into our monitor or monitors, which is TrueSight, or into Remedy to actually create an incident to the appropriate resolver team, or actually then trigger an alert into OpsGenie to call a team onto a bridge immediately to actually fix an issue that could actually be causing a P1 very shortly. And that really is how we're starting to think about how to run an effective cloud operations organization from a monitoring and alerting perspective. So, what's next in our cloud journey? So BMC and AWS have announced a strategic partnership. They announced that last year. And I've been working very closely directly with the BMC and AWS teams to start thinking about how does this actually impact me and the services that they provide me as my infrastructure provider and my operations provider. And we're doing a lot of work right now with AWS on their Connect platform, which is basically their help desk solution. And what we're now doing is actually starting to integrate the AWS Connect solution into Remedy, which we're now piloting on actually with our service desk for our employees right now. So this is a really innovative way of actually providing a cloud-based customer service contact center that integrates directly into your ticketing tool, which provides a much better level of support for our customers, utilizing capabilities like voice transcribe and transpose to actually understand sentiment analysis from our employees when they make a call to the service desk. The other big thing we're doing is actually from a desktop perspective for our employees is actually moving away from and giving people the option to utilize AWS workspaces as kind of virtual desktop environments. And what we want to do is actually then expose that as part of a service catalog that any employee can actually request or restart or reboot their workspace environment. And this is where we're actually utilizing the service catalog that AWS have created, but then actually exposing that through the BMC digital workplace environment, which is the employee-facing way of actually requesting something from technology. So that's another thing we're looking at right now. A lot of you are probably starting to think about containerization and utilizing EKS and Fargate, and also starting to look at serverless technologies like Service Mesh and Lambda. This, to me, is the unsolved question that we're currently working on from a Dow Jones perspective. How are you going to actually monitor these solutions in the future? How are you actually going to create alerts? What tools are you going to use to actually say what's happening on basically cloud, that it comes and goes as a microservice? Do you want to bring in a container or a Lambda function into your configuration management database to actually have an alert generated against that, when that instance may actually disappear within a couple of minutes? So we're now starting to think about how does this actually work? How does operations work in a service mesh and in a container environment? And the other thing, we talked about the alert bus earlier, but also starting to talk about the event bus. How do we create actionable events from all that information that's being generated within AWS, say, for example, in CloudWatch? And we're actually working very closely with our professional information business teams to actually use Amazon Kinesis to actually create monitoring and alerting data that then feeds into the alert bus to actually help operations. So that's what we've been doing at Dow Jones. That's what we're planning to do next in our cloud journey. And I'd like to thank BMC and AWS for their support they've given. I know there's quite a few of you in the audience today giving me mutual support. But most importantly, I'd like to thank all of you for showing interest and actually attending this presentation. So thank you very much.